We're going to talk about the biological factors of criminal behavior. These theories arose out of positivism or positivism criminology. Positivism criminology is directly after classical and neoclassical criminology. In fact, it arose as a critique of classical and neoclassical criminology. Positivism focuses on the criminal offenders, whereas classical criminology focuses on crime itself. How this change came about was after the first crime stats began to be compiled in France in 1827. These statistics led people to question the classical and neoclassical ideas about crime because the crime stats showed that recidivism was increasing. So what criminologists concluded was that punishment alone was not reducing crime. The statistics also showed that crime was going up, so punishment was not deterring crime either. So let's talk about some of the positivist concepts. Positivism assumes that criminal and non-criminal behavior are determined by different factors. Remember, where classical theorists assume that all behavior, both criminal and non-criminal, is the result of free will and choice, positivist criminology actually view criminal behavior as somehow pathologically different from non-criminals. So they reject the notion of free will and choice as factors that influence criminal behavior, and they actually view behavior as something determined by forces which are, to some extent, beyond the individual's control. Those factors can be biological or psychological, which we'll talk about in Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, or social, and that is the remaining of positivism, which we will talk about in the next chapters. So they focus on identifying the causes of criminal behavior. Since the factors leading to criminal behavior are largely beyond the individual's control, positivist criminology view punishment alone as an ineffective way to reduce crime. Instead, they advocate various means of treatment or rehabilitation as the best way to reduce crime. Most criminological theories probably can be classified as positivism, and currently this is the most dominant paradigm in criminology. So these crime stats, where did they come from? Well, the first one was Gary, and what he did was he mapped crime rates and other social factors, and as you see, that is a map of France. And so what he found was through his focus on poverty, and he found that the wealthiest regions had the highest rate of property crime, but only had about half of the rate of violent crime. So he concluded that poverty alone did not cause crime, but opportunity for property crime was higher in wealthiest regions. Then we have Quetelet. And what Quetelet found was that some people are more likely to commit crime, specifically young, poor, unemployed, and undereducated individuals. He found that areas with more wealth and employed people had more crime, but the crime was actually committed by people who were poor and unemployed. The reason was that the opportunity to commit the crime was in the wealthy areas, and the people who were poor were traveling there to commit the crime. So it was typically areas characterized by inequality. Areas that had majority of poor people living in them had low crime as long as people who lived there could satisfy their basic needs. So Quetelet advocated to continue punishment according to classical and neoclassical ideals, but he also argued that there was a need for social reforms to improve the conditions of people's lives. Now, when we're talking about trait and individual theories in regard to positivism, these theories focus on personal traits that differentiate criminals from non-criminals. And there are two major forms of trait in individual theory. There is biological and there is psychological. This chapter focuses on biological. The next chapter focuses on psychological. Trait and individual theories are still positivism. So let's talk about biological theories. Biological theory has some general assumptions. First, crime is viewed as a disease. And remember, because this is a positivist theory, criminal behavior is caused by some mechanism or factor which is internal to the individual. There are two perspectives within biological theory. There is pure biological theory, where they view or see criminals as being born that way. And then there is soft biological theory. And these theorists view people as being predisposed to become criminals. So they have certain traits that predispose them to become criminals, but they may or may not ever manifest. So, for example, an individual may be predisposed to aggression. They may commit a crime as a result, but they may not. Soft biological theorists say that other factors are also important or equally as important as biology. So biological theory rejects the notion of free will and replaces it with determinism. So our behavior is not determined by our choices, but by our genetic makeup.